Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Early Childhood Chats, the podcast. I'm really excited to be back with you today. Andy Roszak here, as always. And today I'm joined by Amber with Kids and Car Safety. Amber coming to us from, you're still in Kansas, I believe, right, Amber?
I am. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. We are going to talk about all things car safety related to our kids today. And this is a very, very important topic. I've been working with Amber and her friends for, gosh, many years now. And I'm always astonished to see how many incidents, how many accidents, how many deaths happen every single year, which seem to me to be very, very easily preventable in many cases. But so many happen every single year. And it's such tragedy for many of the families. So we're going to talk today about all things that we can do to keep our kids safe when they're around vehicles, preventing hot car deaths. We'll talk about vehicle submersion. We'll talk about your pets for a little bit. We'll talk about, kids that unfortunately get ran over, get backed over, front overs, as we call them. All sorts of different things. So, Amber, thank you so much for being here. I know that you have been working with kids in car safety since 2005. I know that you are actually, you graduated, I think you were a Jayhawk, if my memory serves correct.
Rock Chalk Jayhawk, I was.
So, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, how you get involved in this work, and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis over at Kids in Car Safety, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. I started working with our president and founder, Jeanette Fennell, at Kids in Car Safety when I was about 19 years old and going to school for social work. So I was really interested in doing policy advocacy type work, really kind of thought about law school, and that was a lot of school. And really, when I found out what Jeanette was working on and the tragedies she was working on preventing and how nobody else was doing anything about it, I knew that that was the right path for me and a way that I could make a big difference for children. So I just kind of fell into it, and it's been, let's see, 19 years now, and really love what I do every day.
Well, and if I can share the little bit of the backstory, I won't get into all the details, but I will say Jeanette's founding of Kids in Car Safety is really spurred out of a real tragic incident, which could have been obviously much worse. But 1995, her husband and her were kidnapped and essentially left for dead in their car's trunk. And I just can't even imagine what that must have been like going through. But instead of kind of dwelling on that, she really got encouraged and spurred to take some action. And in no small part, in large part, it's thanks to Jeanette and all her advocacy efforts is the reason why now when you get into the trunks, you actually see that glow in the dark handle, isn't it, to release yourself.
Yeah, it's really incredible what she was able to do after her and her husband were able to escape the trunk, which was nothing short of a miracle. Never ends that way. She was successful in getting a federal safety standard passed that requires just a little glow in the dark piece of plastic to be put in the trunk of all vehicles. 3 cents per vehicle is what it costs. And the best news out of all of it is that not one person has died in the trunk of a car, to our knowledge, in the trunk of a car that has that release. I mean, it completely eliminated the problem. So it's a great testament to how safety standards work to save lives and how advocacy and channeling grief into positive change can be really powerful.
And it's amazing some of the small investment. I mean, you talk about 3 cents a car. I mean, you talk about the return on investment for that 3 cents. It's astronomical. And a lot of the work, quite honestly, that you do is kind of that same model where we're not asking people to really spend millions and billions of dollars. We're asking people to spend just fractional amounts to really go a long way of increasing safety. I wanted to talk just for a minute, and I'll share some of the data, and then I'm going to ask you to reflect on it. But you do a lot of work with the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration, or what we call NHTSA. And it looks like the data from 2016 to 2020, that's 4 years, approximately 2,449 people were killed, 86,920 were injured annually in non-traffic motor vehicle crashes, and 506 deaths from non-crash vehicle injuries per year. So I know you operate in this space of kind of non-crash and non-traffic and all that stuff. Can you help us define that and tell us kind of what that means?
Yeah, so most people don't even realize there's a difference between a traffic crash and a non traffic incident. And basically, in order to qualify as a traffic crash, You have to be involved in an actual crash in a vehicle, and you have to be on a public roadway when that happens, and you have to die within 30 days of the crash, or your death doesn't count as a traffic crash. So, for example, when a child is backed over in a driveway, or a child is left in a hot car and dies in a parking lot, these type of things are non-traffic incidents. And the reason that Kids in Cars started collecting data is because anything non-traffic, so anything involving a vehicle that happens off of a public roadway, is not being counted in those traffic crash numbers that are reported every year. And if there's no data, then they get away with saying, hey, there's no problem here. And so many, many years ago, Kids in Car Safety decided that we were going to start collecting that data, because we needed to be able to say, this is how many kids are backed over, every week in our country. This is how many kids are being strangled by power windows and knocking cars into gear and dying from heat stroke, and being run over because the driver literally couldn't see them in the driveway. These are all non-traffic things, and because of the data that we've collected over the years, we've been able to bring these issues that are really happening much more frequently than people think to the national agenda. We've been able to prove their problems and get solutions implemented to prevent them.
So I know it's not easy to get this data. How are you kind of collecting and analyzing and do this? I'm supposing this has got to be kind of a mammoth list on your part to even quantify and categorize some of this data that you're seeing.
It's a work of love and just, yes, grassroots efforts. So most of our data comes initially from media reports, believe it or not, because when there's a non-traffic incident, there is no box to check on that police report. There is no code at the hospital in the medical coding, the ICD-10 codes. There's no coding that you can check for a backover or a hot car death. And so in order for us to learn about these tragedies, we can't extract that data from existing records. We have to build the data from scratch. And so most of the cases we identify initially through a media report. We have a tracking service where we use a very sophisticated Boolean search criteria, and we sift through articles every day. And when we find a case, we document it. And as much as we're able to, we go seek out additional information. The data that we've been able to document is just the tip of the iceberg. And probably one of the most significant successes that we've had as an organization was getting a federal law passed back in 2008 to require our NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to begin collecting and reporting on non-traffic incidents. So as of right now, they are coming up with estimates nationally based on tally marks or a rough estimate of cases from 5 out of the 50 states. So it's not ideal, it's not complete, and it leaves a lot to be desired. We are constantly trying to work with them to improve that and understand what we can do to really get a better understanding.
You start to think about just some of the tragedy, and I know it's hard when you start seeing some of these numbers because really each one represents an individual tragedy that families are going to sadly have to live with the rest of their lives. And I just wonder, kind of in this era of compassion fatigue and burnout and mental health considerations, how are you processing some of this stuff? How are you, staying positive when looking at some of these horrific things that are happening throughout the country?
Some days are easier than others. We really try to support each other here at our team and be mindful that we're reading, the worst stories ever every day, and take care of our own hearts and our own minds. But there's a lot of tears. I'll be completely honest. We work with families who've inadvertently taken the lives of their own children, and there's just nothing worse than that could happen to somebody. Some of them have lost spouses to suicide after it's happened. It's the worst of the worst. And what we try to do is help these families do what Jeanette did with her story, is take this awful thing that happened to them and create good and honor their child doing it. And it's truly a beautiful thing to watch because it's very healing for these families. And they're able to say, hey, I did something really incredible in my child's honor and keep their memory alive. And that's really what's the most meaningful to them, is that their child is never forgotten. So it's really cool to watch that process happen and watch these families grow as advocates and become strong, powerful people making real change happen.
We've done a lot of work over the years. We've got free courses on our website that we've put out for, gosh, a long time. And we're trying to help folks to not have these horrible things happen. And I think when I first learned of it and first met, kids in car safety, one of the biggest things that really struck me, because I think we have this mindset of like, oh, these are horrible people. These parents are just irresponsible and blah, blah, blah. And how could they do this? And they should be put in jail and thrown away the key. But when you really start, meeting people and hearing the stories and seeing what is happening, it's astonishing to me how much of this truly does happen. Because look, as a parent, you got a million things going on. And it seems like the big culprit of a lot of this is a change in routine. Dad usually takes the kids and drops them off at the Head Start or the child care program. And for whatever reason, today mom's going to do it. And that seems to be the catalyst for a lot of problems, just that big change in routine. And I think, if nothing else, just changing the perception of these, in many, many cases, are not horrible people. These are people that simply made a mistake, and it's going to haunt them, sadly, for the rest of their life. Was that kind of surprising a little bit for you when you first started digging into some of the data and the details behind kind of the root causes of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the hardest things that we work on, is trying to help people understand how a loving, responsible, attentive parent could lose awareness that their child is with them and inadvertently leave them in a car all day. I mean, how? Because if you really love your kids, you're thinking about them all day, they never are far from your mind. And that's absolutely true of these parents. They really believe that their child is a daycare. They go to the daycare at the end of the day to pick them up. I mean, they have no idea that they missed that drop off. And when you really think about it and you take the time to learn about how the memory systems in the brain work, it makes more sense. So I want to kind of just talk you through that a little bit. We work with a great neuroscientist. His name is Dr. David Diamond. He is a memory expert with a terrible memory, which is kind of funny. But this actually happened to him with his grandchild. And thank goodness his wife was with him and said, David, are you forgetting something? He was ready to get out of the car and move right along. He had no idea that his grandchild was in the back seat with him. And so, we laugh about that with him, but he had a happy ending. It doesn't always end that way. And so, what happens in your brain is you have two competing memory systems. You have the hippocampus, which controls what's happening right here, right now. It's your conscious memory. And then you have the basal ganglia. And that basal ganglia controls your habit memories. So it allows you to drive from home to work without a single conscious thought about where to turn or how to drive the vehicle, because it's a habit. You've done it over and over again, and your brain has registered that. The basal ganglia has stored it, and boom, it can snap you into autopilot mode when you're stressed out, overwhelmed, you haven't slept enough. And it's like kind of a survival mechanism that we have in our brain. So when you have a parent who's extremely sleep deprived, which is pretty much par for the course, this because you have young children, that sleep deprivation, it does funny things to us. And when we're sleep deprived, that basal ganglia engages into autopilot mode much more easily, much more frequently. And the problem with that basal ganglia, or that habit memory, is that it really is actually completely unable to account for a change in routine to that habit or that series of events that you've done, unless there's some kind of invasive alert to remind you that there's a change. Okay. So let's say you've got a parent who is driving from home to work. They take the child to daycare. It's part of their normal daily routine. They have two stops. They drop the infant off and then they drop the toddler off. And on this particular day, there was something going on at daycare and they had to drop the toddler off first. So they do. They drop the toddler off. They get back into the car. Autopilot engages and they drive straight to work like they would do any other day from the toddler's daycare, never realizing they never made the infant drop off. Their habit memory had taken over. That basal ganglia knew when I leave the toddler daycare, I go straight to work. They were in autopilot mode, and that's exactly what they did. And that infant was left in the car all day. That parent had no idea. The baby is in a rear facing car seat, so the driver can't see the baby no matter what. The baby's fallen asleep because that's what babies do in the car. And it's a recipe for disaster. And I'd be willing to say that I think that this loss of awareness has happened to every single parent out there, but they didn't register it as a loss of awareness or that they forgot their child with them because something happened to snap them out of autopilot mode and to make them realize that the baby was back there. And I give another really good example. So I've been doing this for 19 years, okay? 12 years into my work on this issue, my son was 3 months old. I was extremely sleep deprived, and he had just started going to daycare. I'd been on maternity leave for 3 months, just started going to daycare a couple weeks prior. My older daughter had a sleepover, and I needed to drop her friend off on the way to daycare. Then I was supposed to go to work. So I dropped the friend off, which I've done 750 times. And then I had previously, before my son was born, always turned around and went back home to work, straight from her house. Well, I was supposed to go to daycare, not go home. And my habit memory told me, go home. It's time to go to work. So I pulled out of the driveway and I turned right and I was headed home to work with my son sleeping in his rear facing car seat. I had completely lost awareness he was with me. And he made this dinosaur screeching noise that I'll never forget. And instantly I knew, oh my gosh, I lost awareness that he was with me. And I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't have screeched in the back seat. So it almost happened to me, somebody who is an expert on the topic. And it was that moment in time that I realized, oh my gosh, this really can happen to anybody, even me.
Well, especially with those young ones. I mean, my 3-year-old, she's going to make noise. Like you're not going to forget she's there. But like you said, my 6-month-old, they go to sleep and they're quiet and all that stuff. So I totally get it. And I've been really impressed at some of the really low cost solutions. Look, we know families don't have a lot of money. Childcare doesn't have a lot of money. Just something really simple like put something in the back with the kids that you're going to remember, right? Like my cell phone. Like I may forget, embarrassing to admit, I may forget the kids are in the back, but I tell you what, I'm not going to get 10 feet away from that car without my cell phone, right? I mean, I don't know if what that says about us as a society with our priorities, but,
Well,
I've seen other people with signs and teddy bears and other stuff, but kind of that simple reminder seems like it's enough to jar you and say, hey, where's my cell phone? Oh gosh, I got the kids in the back, right?
yeah, and we always want to be so careful when we talk about that safety tip because people get really bent out of shape when we start saying put something important in the back seat. Nothing's more important than the kids, right?
Right.
It's really not about the cell phone being more important than the child. It's about whatever item you put in the back seat to help you get into the habit of opening that back door and checking the back seat every time you leave the car. It has to be something that you have to utilize right away. So it's not that this phone is more important than the child, it's that we utilize our phone for basically everything these days. So you go to reach for your phone all the time, whether it's to check the weather or look at your calendar and see what appointments you got for the day or make a call or all the different things that we do on our phones. We have to access them regularly throughout the day. So the phone is a great item to put in the back seat. You could also use something like your key card to get into your office building or
Mm.
your laptop. if you sit down to work at your desk and you don't have your laptop, you're going to have to go back to the car and get it. So the idea is, we call it look before you lock. Open the back door, look in the back seat every single time before you lock the car and walk away. And then, like, the other thing we really want parents to do is grab a big stuffed animal, put it in the back seat. Anytime you buckle the children into the back seat, you bring that stuffed animal up to the front seat with you as a visual cue that your child is with you. You can do this with a diaper bag. And I get a lot of people, when I talk about this, I get a lot of people going, really, Amber? Come on. Like a big stuffed animal is going to make me remember my kids. I should be remembering them. I shouldn't have to do that. And I get it. I really do. But what we know is, if you go back and you look at hot car deaths by year, in the mid to the late 1990s is when they really took off. They were virtually non-existent before the 1990s. And what happened was, we changed the way that we transport our children. In the mid 1990s, children were being killed by overpowered airbags. And so there was this big national campaign: move your kids to the back seat. That's where they need to be. And that's where they're the safest. And they still are the safest there. Please don't put them in the front seat. That is not safe. It's not a good solution here. But one of the unintended consequences of moving into back seat is that they're being inadvertently left behind. And hot car deaths just went from basically not happening to happening, 30, 40, even 50 or more times a year after that, basically overnight, when we moved them to the back seat. So what that tells us is that out of sight can, unfortunately and very tragically, mean out of mind. And that reminder item in the front seat is so important. It's that cue that your basal ganglia needs if you're in autopilot mode, to help snap you out and remind you to make that drop off.
The other thing I think that's kind of overlooked a lot is how quickly these vehicles can heat up. And, look, we've had a lot of crazy weather in Washington, D.C., days over 100 degrees and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't even take that, right? I mean, even if it's an overcast day, these cars just entrap this heat and they heat up so rapidly. Um, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but do you have any kind of reflection on just how quickly something like this can become a real tragedy or a real emergency situation?
Yeah, I can tell you, we have documented many tragedies that have happened on days where it was in the 60s, 70s outside. It doesn't have to be super hot. And the reason for that is, a vehicle is essentially a greenhouse. So it allows that solar energy and that heat to come in through the windows, and then it's trapped inside. It has nowhere to escape. And so what happens is that temperature inside heats up very quickly. In fact, a big majority of the increase in temperature happens within the first 10 minutes or so that car is closed up. And you've got a child whose body temperature rises 3 to 5 times faster than an adult. They are very inefficient at regulating their body temperature. Same with dogs. They can't sweat. They overheat very quickly. And you got a recipe for disaster in literally minutes on a mild day. And then you talk about like 90s or over 100 degrees. Oh boy, zero time in the car is okay. I mean, never leave them in there, not for 1 minute.
And the old wives' tale of like, oh, Amber, I'm just going to crack the window. It'll be okay. Like, not so much, right?
No, and this is even like, I still have a hard time wrapping my head around this. Cracking the window does nothing to lower the maximum temperature reached inside of a vehicle. And someone explained this to me really well. So I'm going to try to regurgitate it here. So that solar energy, or that heat, bounces around in the vehicle from object to object, and the chances of it hitting that little sliver of where the window is open and escaping are pretty rare. So that heat is bouncing around in there, and very little, if any, of it is going to escape through a cracked window.
Hmm.
If you have your windows all the way down. But even still, in these kind of temperatures, and heat is really only one of the dangers children face when they're left alone in cars. I'll tell you, we document hundreds of cases every year of cars stolen with children left alone in the back seat. Terrifying situations, high speed chases, children dumped on the side of the road. We've had tragic fatalities. Most of the time the children end up unharmed seriously, but it happens. And no one wants someone driving away with their children.
No, and we've, thanks to your data and your advocacy and awareness on this, we've actually included that as part of our emergency preparedness, situational awareness, active shooter training. I mean, the bottom line is the criminals really don't want your kids; they want your car.
Yes.
Um, so like, but that's scary because, like you said, I mean, how many times I think I was reading one, I don't know, a few months ago that you guys had put out. They just dumped them in the car seat on the side of a 4 lane, highway, and just the poor kid's strapped in, can't do anything, just sitting there. And, no information, no phone number, no, hi, my name is sticker. I mean, thankfully somebody called the police and they were able to track it down, but how horrible. So, just like think like it never just takes a second, right? Like oh, I'm just going to run into the bank. It'll just take a second, or the baby's sleeping. I don't want to wake the baby, or whatever the case is. Like, no, it never just takes a second. And sadly, we've seen carjackings up to near all-time highs, depending on where you live in the country. So it really just, it gives me, heart palpitations to even think about just seeing that vehicle drive away and knowing that your kids were inside. Boy, oh boy, I hope we never have to experience that, right?
Yeah, it's very scary.
So a lot of advocacy done. I know you've testified before, the Kansas House and the Senate Judiciary Committees. You've talked about, the advocacy you're doing at the national level, working with NHTSA and other partners. Kind of talk through some of the folks on policy change, and how do you take the data? How do you take the stories? How do you combine this in a way to get lawmakers and regulators to actually listen to hear what's going on? Because there's so much noise. There's so many causes out there and everybody wants you to support their cause. How do you take this and package it in a way that's digestible to our policymakers out there?
So we call this our secret sauce, but it's really not a secret. We've got the data, right? So you have to have the data, and that's important. But if you're just showing people numbers, it doesn't mean much. People have a hard time understanding numbers, and when it's just numbers, it's not really emotional. It's not tugging on the heartstrings. But we also have the stories. And, we take these incredibly courageous parents who've lost their children, and they go to DC with us and they meet with their legislators and they bring pictures of their children. And these people have to look them in the eyes and hear their story. And when you combine that with the numbers, it's incredibly powerful. And, we're talking about very small children, age 5 and under are the most affected by non-traffic issues. And these are just, our most vulnerable. They can't protect themselves. They don't even understand danger at that age. So, we've got a pretty compelling case for the need to protect them. And when you combine the data and the stories, it's a no-brainer. And really, this is a bipartisan issue. Everybody should care about saving children's lives. We definitely deal with a lot of pushback from the auto industry when we're working on, regulations to make vehicles safer for children. They push back. They don't want regulations that are, going to control what they put in vehicles. And unfortunately, one thing a lot of people don't understand is that pretty much every safety feature that you have as standard equipment in your vehicle, like seatbelts and airbags and anti-lock brakes, trunk releases, backup cameras, all of these things were mandated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and a hard fought battle that, advocates like us and families who've buried loved ones fought for. And we shouldn't have to fight for the safety of vehicles. They're taking more lives than most other things in our country, and we should all be outraged about that.
I've got to think some of the technology has come such a long way, and I would assume the cost has come down to such a point now where really what we're talking about here, and I don't know what's on your wish list, so that's my next kind of question, but I'm thinking that I've been in cars where if I open the back door and then I drive and I get out and I hit the stop button or off button, it says like, "Hey, reminder, you open the back door. Is there something back there, you need?" And I've also been in cars that have really advanced technology that has some kind of almost like cabin detection or motion detection. I don't know how it does it. It's cool. But
Yeah.
it's like, hey, I know there's people in the back seat. Let me turn the air on for them or whatever. So what's kind of the wish list? What's kind of the next step? What would you like to see to really help tackle some of these issues head on?
So what we need is occupant detection. And I'm glad you mentioned the door sequencing type technology. We're calling that the end of trip reminder. It's very basic. What it does is if you open the back door of your car before you drive somewhere, when you turn the engine off, it tells you to check the back seat. It's usually like a little icon on your dash, or it says check rear seat for passengers. And it doesn't actually detect a child. And that's the problem really with it. We need it to go a step further. We need it to be able to detect a living, breathing child in the back seat and to be able to tell, hey, there's no adult in here. This child is alone. They're in danger. And the great news is that that technology exists and it's readily available. It breaks my heart completely to say this, but it costs less than $20 per vehicle. And, it would cost more to buy new floor mats for your car than to put this life-saving technology in. And we were successful in getting a provision passed as a part of the infrastructure bill in 2021 that is going to require technology in all cars. That final rule is currently overdue. So it was supposed to be finalized in November of last year, but it we have not even seen the notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the first step in getting to the final rule being issued. So we are pushing NHTSA very hard to move forward on this. The technology exists. Like you said, there are cars out there that have occupant detection. I drive one myself. I have a Kia Telluride, and it uses an ultrasonic sensor that can alert you if it detects movement in the rear seat after you've parked your car, locked it, and walked away. And it's a great system. I will caution people, it does not detect children who get in on their own. So that's about 25% of hot car deaths, but it will alert you if you walk away from your car and you have left somebody in the back seat.
Well, it's an astonishing figure. I mean, under $20, I don't know. Let's fix this. Let's pass this today. Let's make this a reality. And I can only commend you on your efforts because I can imagine, look, kids in car safety, you guys do a Herculean effort. You're a small nonprofit and you're going up against some of the biggest automakers in the world with, basically unlimited funds to fight these mandates and regulations. So it's kind of a David versus Goliath in some cases, but you
Yeah.
would hope that common sense would prevail. And at what cost? For years, we've had indicators saying, hey, you left your lights on in your car. At what cost? And I think maybe you might have told me this line years ago, like, how are we going to prioritize a dead battery over a dead child? And that's always stuck with me about, let's do things that are common sense. Let's do things that aren't going to break the bank. But I think we can all agree there's $20 in there that we could make this a reality. And thank you for Kia for putting that in. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to press you just quickly about the submersion of cars because I think that's really fascinating, and I see a lot of people get this wrong. I think we get what we know on this from like movies and stuff where cars go in rivers and all this crazy stuff happens. So if you can give us our brief digest about if your car goes into some water body, a body of water, what are we supposed to do? What does that look like?
All right. So first, I'm going to tell you what you should not do. You should not touch your cell phone. You should not try to open the doors. What you should do is remain calm and follow our SWOC safety tips. SWOC, SWOC. So we want people to remember this. I'm going to say it a few times, and then I want everyone out there listening to repeat it and memorize it. So seatbelts off, window open, out the window, children first, oldest to youngest. So seatbelts off, window open, out the window, children first, oldest to youngest. The reason for this is if you don't get that window down in time, the pressure from the water is going to become too great that the window will not roll down. And it doesn't have to be completely underwater for that pressure to be pushing against those windows. As soon as that water starts to rise above the bottom of your vehicle windows, your side windows in your car, that's when the pressure becomes too great for the window to be broken or rolled down. So you have about 60 seconds to get your seatbelts off, to get one window down, and to move to that one window, everybody in the car, and get out that window. And 60 seconds is the key. That goes very quickly when you're, in a panic situation. But if you know what to do, you can survive. So many times we see people die from these submersions, not because of the crash, but because they drowned. They didn't get out in time. You've got to get out of the car. And, we see things like the handles ripped off inside, people trying to open the doors. Or there was a terrible case recently of a woman who called somebody instead of getting out of the car, and she drowned inside her Tesla. We think about the bridge collapse that happened recently. If those people had gotten out of their vehicle, they could have survived.
Well, it's certainly something to think about, and hopefully we never have to use it. But I like the SWOC, SWOC, right? Is that what we call it?
Walk, seatbelt, window out.
And I did want to say, child care providers, you have a major role in preventing some of these things from happening. If a child doesn't show up at your program, reach out to the parents, right? Especially if it's unscheduled. Say, hey, little Johnny didn't show up today. That phone call, that text message, that outreach can really make a difference between life and death. And we've seen a lot of examples of that over the years. Educate your parents on car safety. Make sure that we're, talking this and practicing this. And certainly, kids in car safety, you have a host of free resources and infographics and newsletters and all sorts of wonderful stuff that you have. Amber, if folks want to find out more about what you're doing, if they want to support your work, which I wholeheartedly, and I'm a donor, I love you guys. How can they find out more? How can they reach you? How can they support what you're doing?
Yes, and thank you for your support. You've been an amazing partner, and you give so much of your time and talents and treasures. So we're very, very pleased to have you on our team. People can visit our website. It's kidsandcars.org. You can also find us on social media. We are a nonprofit organization, so we function almost primarily on individual donations, and we need people's support to keep it going. This is really important work, and really no one else is doing it. We're leading the way on a lot of the issues that we work on, and really discovering emerging issues as we collect this data. So it's critical. And please do follow us on our social media. Check out our website. We've got a ton of resources for parents on all sorts of different topics that we didn't even have time to cover today. So please check them out, read the tips, share with your friends and family. And if you're a child care provider out there listening, this is important for you too.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's great to see you. Thank you for all the wonderful work that you've been doing. Amber was a bit modest. They actually put her in a car and shoved her into a lake or a river or something not too long ago so she could talk about this and film some of this getting out of the submerged car. So she is a trooper. She breathes it. She practices it. She lives it with her kids. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Please say hi to everybody there. And certainly a shameless plug. We have a free course on our website. I think it's about an hour long, talking about all sorts of tips for parents and for childcare providers, how we can get engaged and make a difference. Hey, if we save one life, it's way worth it, right? So thank you very much for the Early Childhood Chats podcast. This is Andy. I hope you enjoyed it. We have a lot of great content coming up. If you'd be so kind, we'd love a review from you. Share this widely with your friends on social media. We just want to get the word out. So for everybody out there, say stay safe, and we'll see you on the next podcast.